Pong is a 1972 video game abstracted representation of table tennis and considered to be one of the platonic forms of the video game by a grand majority of people who discuss video games, usually only behind something like Pac-Man. It is often then discussed solely as an object of play and a foundational one at that, which is perfectly fine, because it is one. However, there is more to Pong than simply play, a narrative emergent from its depiction of its polar conflict. Pong is a text that reflects the broader dynamics and themes of the Yuri genre present throughout Japanese art, shown through the distance between the two paddles that is only connected through a yearning passing of a ball being akin to Yuri's subtextual longing and romance expressed only through caresses and soft kisses, the mechanical friction between the two paddles being representative of the conflict that the two women come into against each other and the world, and ultimately the tragic loss of one paddle evoking a classical Yuri trope where one of the women involved dies, which, while not omnipresent and not as common in contemporary Yuri writing, is a historical trapping of the oeuvre. Yuri itself is most easily understood as Japanese art depicting lesbian relationships, although there is a bit more nuance to the genre specifically than simply women loving other women and forming relationships with each other. In particular, Yuri often fixates heavily on unfulfilled feelings. The romance in Yuri typically depicts not much more physical contact than kissing or hand-holding, if even that. Yuri itself is a specter that represents love between women beyond physicality, a set of conventions that can even transcend what society traditionally understands as women. A scene of two formerly adjacent trash cans brushing against each other as one is hauled away is a classic example of Yuri tragedy in action. The tension between the two trash cans is unresolved and one is forever removed from the other. So while Yuri is most commonly and definitionally female, it also applies to even things not conventionally understood as feminine. The paddles in Pong take on a Yuri quality in much a similar way that those trash cans might. The two paddles in Pong maintain a notable distance from one another, placed directly on the opposite sides of the screen. The only contact that the two paddles have between each other is the passing of the ball between them. Ball meets paddle, paddle meets ball, and so it continues. Not only do they have an extremely limited physical connection to one another, it is also an indirect one. The passion between the two paddles is incomplete, much like how in a Yuri text, the physical connection between the two women often does not escalate beyond one brushing the other's hair or a gentle, passionate kiss. There is no romantic climax between the paddles of Pong, only a distance and a yearning for a world where their love could be completely theirs, interlaced with the friction between their souls and the material. That tension is another similarity to Yuri present in Pong, the conflict between the two paddles, as it were, throughout the text. In Pong, the two paddles don't just send the ball over to each other as an act of passion, although it certainly is one. It's also a means to win its aforementioned abstracted game of table tennis. One paddle will always, inevitably, get the ball to the other side. The form necessitates a passionate conflict between the two lovers that is reminiscent of the inherent conflict of love that Yuri represents in the first place. One side scores, the other side scores. This back and forth forms a romantic dialogue, love as and is war. Two paddles improve in response to each other as two lovers might, a love that, though distant, is ultimately fruitful as each becomes more themselves. There is a final tragedy present in many Yuri stories and present in Pong. Though not as common in contemporary Yuri fiction, romantic tragedy was once the main genre the stories cohabitated with. This phenomena stems from the 1971 Ryoko Yamagishi Yuri manga Shiroi Heya no Futari, which is generally considered to be the foundational text of Yuri as a genre on the whole, despite other works that could be considered Yuri existing beforehand. It's a text about two French women finding love at an all-female boarding school, and it ends with one of them being brutally murdered in the name of that love. This would inspire following works in the genre to end in tragedy for the next 20 years before the 90s brought the onset of Yuri texts such as Sailor Moon, which are much less colored in that tragedy. Pong, ultimately, follows this formulaic verse only 1 year after Shiroi Heya no Futari, as one paddle must always die at the end of the game. Not only is their passion abated and their conflict intense, but ultimately it must end with the loss of one before the other. While it may be between two tennis paddles, there is grief to be found in Pong. Ultimately, Pong is a Yuri text, if only because Yuri, like any other genre of literature, can be mapped onto most anything as a series of archetypes and ideas. Pong has the distant yearning, the tension, and tragedy all associated with the genre, ending up as a surrealist take on what it means to be a girl's love story. It's a game with many possible avenues of interpretation, something literary to be examined more than people give it credit for beyond a ludic and playful abstraction of ping pong. This has been Arcade Everlasting, who still needs to play Tennis for Two, signing off. Thank you for watching.